An entire population of ethnic Tatars deported from Crimea in the then Soviet Union, accused of being Nazi collaborators. Well, there have been decades of exile for them in Central Asia, and they're now facing new problems after they've returned home to Crimea, now in the Ukraine. Some nationalist politicians accuse the Tatars of bringing radical Islam into Crimea, raising the spectre of ethnic tension there too. Lawrence Lee sent this report from the former capital of Tatar Crimea.
Haidar was 16 when he was deported under the orders of the Soviet leader Joseph Stalin. Like every other Muslim Tatar in Crimea, accused of being a Nazi sympathizer, just one victim of one of the great purges of the 20th century. Haidar was the only member of his family to survive Central Asia. When he came back in 1990, aged 62, he found his family's houses had all been destroyed, or in one case full of Russian families who had taken over. The town Haidar knew as a boy was long gone.
The Russians aren't to blame. It was the fault of the authorities and the state. We were taken to Central Asia. They were ordered to come here from Russia and Ukraine.
So much for history. Nowadays, the town of Bahchisaray looks okay, the twin identities of Russian Orthodoxy and Tatar Islam living side by side and both attracting the tourists. But the continuing return of the Tatars is beginning to cause new divisions. It's easy to find Tatar families still coming back, still making homes, because someone else is living in their old one. You might think that having died by the 100,000 in exile, they'd be welcomed back with material help, not just sympathy or understanding, but no, apparently nothing.
We don't have anything to share with the Russians. We just live day to day. We only hope for some help and peace, but we don't get it. If you don't feed yourself, no one will.
Coming home, then, has become a journey full of bitterness and broken hopes, and no help from authority.
This little scene's a perfect illustration of the extraordinary problems the Tatars faced coming back to their own country from so many decades of deportation. First of all, they weren't allowed planning permission to build a house, and so they had to live in somewhere that didn't need planning permission, like a garage, for example. And so many families lived in places like this until they were able to get planning permission over several years. And then more and more members of the same family come back and live in the same house. And gradually then, as the years and now the decades go by, if they have enough money and they're very lucky, they can just about afford to build a house next door.
And what of the Soviet Russians, now Ukrainians, who took the Tatars' homes? By and large, it seems they are prepared to tolerate their new Muslim neighbours, though there are dark warnings from some about the Tatars importing radical Islam from countries like Uzbekistan and trying to create a new Chechnya or Kosovo.
We know who the organizations are, and they don't even try to hide it. They get financial support and they go and train abroad. We don't want a repeat of Chechnya in Crimea.
Which sounds to the Tatar leadership like a spurious attempt to whip up ethnic hatred off the back of their continuous calls for self-government.
For many years we've demanded autonomy for the Crimean Tatars, but the authorities say we're in the minority here in our native land. They say there is no solution, but for us this is the most important issue. We face discrimination every day.
So the return of the Crimean Tatars remains work in progress, and it seems the very best they can expect is nothing. Whether the next generations will be any luckier than their ancestors may depend on the decisions of their Slavic neighbours. Lawrence Lee, Al Jazeera, Crimea, Ukraine.
Coming up on the Al Jazeera